like I'm watching
Is that enough about
Instagram,
the
but
water stewardship?
I'm not.
Okay.
I'm very sure about this,
Yeah,
Stephanie.
perfect.
Promoting this
And
kind
then
of
John in here.
there is a standard made by the Alliance for Water Stewardship,
So
and they are
I'll
promoting
probably
this.
stand up step up as you start your
Yeah,
sitting.
this approach.
I'll step up and
I
go
don't
over
think
to
we
the
are
questions. I may
have
go
time to
before.
stand. I mean,
That's
You,
the guy Ego or whatever from Nestle. Yeah, someone
yeah.
from Nestle.
That's timing it very
You
precisely.
Okay.
university? No,
No,
BCG
no, yeah.
engineer.
So I
No,
will
yes.
speak. Yeah, and
Mining or
yeah,
mining
I don't think
sector
I've
or
never
more
taught
on
teaching,
No, that's I
no,
just feel more natural standing
but
up.
it's a
we do,
panel,
we do
Yeah,
a
yeah.
lot of
I
work
mean, their
for
first
exactly
panel, they had a
PGC.
few
You're
questions.
familiar with a lot
Then
of their
you
work
can
is
also,
related to engineering, mining engineering.
I'm sure there will be
Lots of
questions
linear
what the
for
other-
corridors,
John to answer.
geohazards,
Yeah.
Yeah,
so
look, now we just
landslides,
have to go
free
with the
flows.
flow.
Yeah, yeah.
but we are here in
It's too
Poland,
late
so
to
Yeah,
end
we
now.
do a lot of
it's too
water,
late for
water
having plan
exploration,
Bs.
a lot of
Okay.
water supply,
Yeah.
and we also do
so you can,
a
we
lot of
can, I guess,
humanitarian
we
work,
can.
Would you be happy
specifically
with
what
standing?
I'll be speaking of
I
in
guess
the
so.
conference today on Chris
Good.
Gather
I
on
will
the
be.
humanitarian section actually today.
So if I stand,
I
you
was
will.
She will say a
Okay,
couple of words.
I come
John,
after you. Yes.
to share some
What do you
ideas on the online
Or if I
results.
sit, you
Water
can
exploration,
stand.
No,
Check.
and then you
Honestly,
guys will be ready.
not
Anything.
only
Stephanie.
cement,
Usually it's
also
Everything.
everything.
Yeah, we
It's
have
Volcanic,
my mom when she's
Yeah,
this is
around.
exactly what I'm going to talk to
But
after
you
unconsolidated
can, yeah,
valley
for the panel
crystallization.
and here you see what they see.
no, yeah.
many years ago, I met some colleagues in Belmont office in
Good
York.
morning, everyone. Welcome to panel 2 on future-proofing hydrogeology education. It was very important for the organizers and for a lot of people that contacted us to spotlight also groundwater education in this Congress. And we are very happy that we have really a truly global panel today that will debate this very important topic. The panel will be moderated by John Cherry from the Groundwater Project and G360 from Canada. He will then introduce all the panelists as they speak. So please, John, just a small remark maybe. You can also participate again.
I'll say that.
You say that? Okay,
Yes.
good. Okay, so I hand over the word to John and Philip.
Thank you, Danielle. Welcome, everyone, to this plenary session on education. When we were developing the scientific program, we thought that this conference would be an excellent opportunity to put also the focus on education. Because there are numerous important questions. For example, are universities teaching the right things? What do the consultants actually think about the education they received? And how is it that there is a clear demand for hydrogeologists, but nevertheless it seems that we do not train enough people? So in this context, we organized several events and several activities. One of them was this teaching survey that we sent around. I just checked this morning, over 500 people have participated. This is a great outcome, and we will share some results with you today. And you can still, if you haven't done it, participate in this survey as well. Now, when we were putting together the panel, we tried to include people from academia, consultants, recent graduates, but also people who come from different geographical locations. So this is why you see here a relatively large panel, and that's also why I will need to do a little bit of timekeeping during this debate. Now, as Danielle mentioned, you can participate, you can submit your comments. They will be synthesized by James, and we will not be able to answer all of them, but we will come back to you because we really want to maintain this dialogue. Now, I know very few people who are as passionate about hydrogeological teaching than John Cherry. John Cherry is sitting just next to me, and he will share his thoughts on the current state of hydrogeological teaching. John.
Good morning, everyone. I'm pleased to chair this panel of very accomplished and interesting people, so I hope you enjoy it, and having gotten up early to get here, I'm sure it'll be worth a while. And I'll take these flicker.
Yes.
I'll speak for 4 minutes here and just do a little overview to set the stage. So the organizations that matter in the world, and this is just a few of them, have concluded that there's a groundwater crisis. Water is reaching a tipping point. Water insecurity is threatening world economic growth and political stability. Water insecurity risks triggering a global food crisis. So there's a global food crisis that's agreed to, but what isn't realized is it's mostly a groundwater dependent crisis. So that's what we groundwater people realize, and that our job is to get this recognition out there. So groundwater is generally ignored or mismanaged, and even though groundwater makes up 99% of all liquid water, and this is a really important percentage number. I mean, when you look at that number, it becomes obvious that groundwater is important. But water understanding is not holistic, and in universities it's very siloed. So according to Geoscience magazine, there's a global trend, and in the US, undergraduate geoscience enrollment peaked at around 3,200 students in 2015, but by 2021 it was down to just over 20,000. And in Canada, amazingly, which is a resource-dependent country, it's even worse. And hydrogeology seems to be following this trend in many countries. Now, the 1960s were the good old days. If you knew what was in these two textbooks, you considered yourself knowledgeable. So professors didn't need to know very much, and students didn't need to learn very much. Like it was all there, nicely enshrined in groundwater hydraulics, and in the second book by Davis and Deweese, which is actually a very nice book. Stan Davis, a professor at Arizona, was a Renaissance hydrogeologist. But groundwater knowledge sort of upped by a factor of 10, so my colleague Al Fries and I wrote a book in '79, and it had 11 chapters and covered many more things because hydrogeology had grown immensely. But the knowledge wasn't too great, so two people, Al and myself, were capable of writing a book that more or less covered the terrain and didn't get us into too much trouble. And then things multiplied by another factor of 10 or more, and many more textbooks appeared, and groundwater then was getting into becoming an immensely complicated and diverse field. And that's when knowledge became very threatening, and life became much more difficult for professors to figure out what to teach and students on what to learn. So, but textbooks contain little deep knowledge. They have to be superficial because you only allowed so many pages, 500 or 600 pages. So you have to fit everything you want to talk about in a textbook into a very short length. And as time went by, the textbooks multiplied, but basically the content of the introductory textbooks remained more or less the same. And then, in addition, hydrogeology has many types of media. So if you learn about porous media, that doesn't help you very much when you're looking at aquatards or fractured media or karst, etc. So the complexity was really rising. And so we need synthesized knowledge, and textbooks are supposed to contain synthesized knowledge, and that's what the Groundwater Project does. We publish books online prepared by experts from across the globe in many languages and free access. And so we published 52 books. Each book covers a particular topic. Each book is synthesized knowledge done by a very, very knowledgeable person. So what Al Fries and I did, working very hard in '79 now, is done with each of these topics with very knowledgeable people on each. But the Groundwater Project then makes apparent the immense scope and complexity of hydrogeology, and relative to this readily available immense knowledge, what should students learn? Like, what should competence mean now that we've moved from the 1950s, 60s, where we could all be competent, and now we have an immense knowledge base. So this is a quote from two of the most distinguished hydrogeologists in Canada at the time. Groundwater studies have fewer means to safeguard us from mistakes than virtually any other field in the realm of applied geosciences. And I just found this slide recently and we're using it. I think it's an immensely important statement in terms of what we're considering here. And now we'll proceed to hear from these distinguished panel members. And Ty Foray will start.
Great. Thanks very much. I'd actually like all of you to indulge me as we start. And I'd like you to take your name tag in your hand and hold it up so that the person next to you can see it. And I'd like you to introduce yourself. Something like, hello, I'm Ty Foray and I'm a hydrogeologist. All right. It's fine. It's like a therapy session to start with. And as you do that, I want you to take a minute and recognize just how lucky you are that the person that you just introduced yourself to knows what you're talking about. How many times in the public do you talk to somebody and you say, I'm a hydrogeologist, and they say, but what do you do? What is that? So, if I can bring you back in here, let's talk about what this means and what it means going forward. So far, we're lucky because we're in a conference like this, and because probably most of us went through a program that was based on one of these early textbooks that John talked about. Most of us have an inherent idea of what a hydrogeologist is. So even though we do 1,000 different things in this room, we all can talk to each other. We all have a common base of knowledge and a common base of skills that not only can we understand what each other does, but we can also work with each other. And this is a really important thing that we have right now. The talks that we're going to have today build on this idea that John has presented so well, that this explosion of subdisciplines within hydrogeology. We're going to hear some talks about different perspectives on the problem. And then really importantly, we're going to hear some talks about some really exciting things that people are putting together to try to address this lack of hydrogeologists. How do we do this going forward when this standard that we've all been through, which is a standard process through a university leading to a master's or something equivalent, that's no longer the standard, right, or the only way that people are going to go. So as you hear all of these different things, the phrase that I want to have ringing in your head is yes and. We need all of these. It's not a competition to say, should we do this at university? Should we do it online? Should we do it somewhere? We need everything if we're going to meet the demand going forward. So that's one thing I want you to keep in mind. The second thing I want you to keep in mind is, how can you help? Because you are hydrogeology, right? You and your colleagues define what this field is. And I think it's really important that we take a moment right now as our field starts to really explode in the different disciplines and the different ways that we're delivering education. We need to take this time to say who we are. And if you agree with me, if you're listening to these and you think it's going to be important 20 years from now that we have a common language, a common basis upon which to call ourselves hydrogeologists, then I'd really like to invite you to join in this conversation. You can do this by clicking on this QR code, and I'll bring it up again later if you miss it now. You can join over 400 hydrogeologists who've signed on to say, yes, I think it's important that we define the core knowledge and skills of our discipline now as we move forward. And then the next stage of this will actually be bringing people together from around the world, different disciplines, different points in their career, to actually come up with what this definition might be. Now, I want to take a minute to say what this is not. This is not a common curriculum, even though I've called it that in the past. This is not saying everybody should learn the same thing and become a hydrogeologist. It's saying there is a nugget in there that all of us should learn so that we can work together, so that we can continue to become a functioning community. So again, if you're at all interested in that, I'd invite you to join or just find me, and I'm happy to point you to that. So enjoy the rest of the talks. Thanks very much. Stephanie.
Thank you. So if we, according to the answer to the survey that I hope all answered, everyone across all fields and disciplines agree on the fact that we lack of properly trained hydrogeologists as a community and on a global scale. And when you were asked why, two key factors stood out. And the first one is the lack of awareness. And it's lack of awareness about the pathways in hydrogeology, but I believe that here we touch a much deeper problem. Because whether we like it or not, the children rather dream of being marine biologists and teachers than hydrogeologists. And I think that directly reflects the lack of awareness in the population about where the water comes from. The vast majority, or most of the people on the planet, depend on groundwater for their domestic use, but yet almost nobody can link their tap with groundwater, let alone have a vague understanding of hydrological cycle and of where the water sits in that hydrological cycle and how it interacts with the other compartments, of course. And because very often universities are publicly funded, this kind of naturally translates in very few relevant teaching programs. So if now, that's also from the survey results, but if we look at the distribution of the practitioners of hydrogeology who actually got a proper hydrogeology training, it's very interesting to note, first of all, how uneven the distribution is. You can see that most of the people who got trained are concentrated on the northern hemisphere. And that on average, it's only about 60% of the people who practice hydrogeology who got a proper hydrogeology training. So I was enrolled in this panel to bring up the perspective of a freshly graduated hydrogeologist. And growing up in Switzerland, where, as you could see from yesterday, water is not exactly a problem, I got to spend a lot of time outside, and I got naturally interested in the environmental questions, and that's where I started studying. But honestly, I had no idea at all that I wanted to do hydrogeology. It's just by going to from one lecture to another that my interest got piqued and that I stayed in that field. And I feel really fortunate because I had the chance to have a full curriculum in hydrogeology and geothermics that I feel prepared me well for my research, but also prepared my peers very well for the private sector. At least that's how most of them feel. But from the survey results and also from the diversity that I could or mostly could not see in my classes, I can see that, I mean, probably Switzerland is a bubble where, of course, not everything is perfect, but where I would say that the curriculum matches rather well the needs for the after-graduate world. But even here, we should be careful not to forget the problem that when faced with the need of a hydrogeological expertise, the solution that is all too often used is to employ someone with a geology degree or environmental engineering degree, assuming that hydrogeology can be learned on the go. And I think that has a double penalty because, first of all, it prejudices the quality of the studies and therefore threatens the quality of the results. And that can have serious consequences for the hydrological systems. But also, it discredits the profession, and it minimizes the specific body of competencies that a hydrogeologist can bring to the table of environmental studies. And I think there we maybe can do something. And now I will pass to Andrea, who will bring us the other perspective, the other side.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. I'm Andrea Gigliuto. I'm working for ERM. I'm an hydrogeologist and partner of the company. ERM is a global consulting firm, so we have offices mainly worldwide with more than 8,000 consultants. And we are serving mainly the industry on sustainability topics. So this is our key word, sustainability, that can be really abused in some way today, but the key point is to make the sustainability something real, not just words or paper. Today I like to give you a vision of a global employer. So is what we are looking for in the candidates and what we didn't find sometimes. And so what is difficult sometimes to find in a person that wants to apply in a global firm? First of all, the strong quantitative hydrogeology skills. So sometimes we have really more generalist geologist or environmental engineer or environmental scientist, but when we discuss a bit about hydrogeology, is just one course that they have done in the last years of the university, but not something really explored. And mainly the source of information is more on the final master thesis or PhD dissertation. Some soft skills, problem-solving attitude, so to not create problems from a point, but solve this point and to try to work with others. Digital skills and ability to bring new competencies, because seems strange, but the global consulting firm, but in general the private sector needs to be fed by new perspective, new technologies, new digital skills. So, and the juniors in the organization are doing the majority of the work. They have the biggest number in the companies, and they need to bring new experience. knowledge about the sustainability framework, because sometimes we are really strong hydrogeologists, but we don't know about the drivers that can bring water and hydrogeology to a most important level for the organization. So talk with people that needs information, but needs also someone that is able to use the same word, the same language. Cross-sector skills, in particular the economics, few information, but sometimes are completely missing in the curriculum. In my curriculum was completely missing when I started, so and it was the same over the last 20 years. And water management approach, so ability to merge the different stakeholder needs. So why this, groundwater well is important for the client, for the communities, the stakeholders, the authorities, how is included in the global framework. So what we are looking for, flexibility, so ability to adapt, because if we hire a strong groundwater modeler, if we don't have a models to be done in that day, now the consultancy is really running fast, we need to work on something else and to also understand which is the next problem for the industry. Desire to make an impact, so not just wait and do his job, but is also to understand how we can move the present situation to a new one. When we work with companies, we want to really ask them to change their way to work. And curiosity and open mindset, and the interest in approaching new technical topics, but embedding them in a wider picture, not just concentrate. Thank you for that possibility. I leave to Paul the next point.
Thank you, Andrea. Yeah, my name's Paul Bowman. I'm a geophysicist and a hydrogeologist. I work for BGC Engineering out of Calgary in Western Canada. And every year, my group and our company, we take on a number of humanitarian water projects, groundwater projects. And in 2019, I was doing a project in the Sud during a truce in the 10 years Sudan civil war. I was flying back from 3 weeks doing groundwater exploration in the largest wetland in southern Africa. And I came out to Juba. I hadn't seen any news. And this was the first story that came up on BBC, climate change, methane pulse found in the Sud. And having just spent 3 weeks there, this should not be the main story in BBC. The main story should be 1 million people displaced by flooding, millions of people without groundwater, 4 million displaced people, 2 million refugees, 500,000 people dead. And this is what hydrogeology as a science, what universities have to do, is start to focus on and identify what are the real challenges, what are the real problems we're facing, and inspire students to deal with these problems, to address these challenges. Another place we've been working for over the last 10 years is in northern Uganda. Northern Uganda has an infant mortality rate of 180. That is, 180 children do not survive their first year of birth. This is 4 times the infant mortality rate of the country with the highest infant mortality rate in the world, Afghanistan. The number of hydrogeologists in northern Uganda is 0. The problem is basically a groundwater problem. Children are dying because of diarrheal diseases, largely caused by poor drinking water. In Western Canada, we have hundreds of geologists, hydrogeologists, most of them focused on supporting the oil and gas industry or the coal industry, for instance, getting benzene levels down from 5 to 4 and selenium levels down to from 6 to 2, and problems that are important, but certainly this is an issue. Issues like this are issues that should be driving industry and driving the universities. So what do the universities have to do? Well, they have to provide the skills, the hard skills, field skills, the basic theory, the basic physical hydrogeology understanding. Also multidisciplinary skills within the geoscience, with of course the most important being geophysics, but also geochemistry, data science, geomatics, and all the many skills that John referenced that are now part of our science. And certainly what I've found later in my career is that even as a geophysicist and a hydrogeologist, there's other science skills that we don't have that are also very important. So for instance, working a lot in East Africa, I've done a lot of the work with fluorosis and having some basic understanding of public health and biology. Human biology is significant. And then there's all the soft skills that are completely ignored in universities: social justice issues, communication. I know only it's in the later parts of my career that I've felt that I've started to develop leadership skills, but I certainly wish I had some of that exposure in university. And then what else, from my experience, what are young people looking for in the earth sciences? It doesn't matter whether they're modelers or field-oriented. They want some adventure in their careers, especially in the earth sciences. They want to have some fun. And again, whether they're a modeler or a geochemist or whatever they do, they want to be working with people. It's all about people. That's what our science is, and that's what most people, at the end of the day, that's what they want in their careers, is to be working with other people. Now, Philip's going to lead us towards some solutions.
Yes. Thank you very much, Paul. So this was an interesting perspective from recent graduates, from educators, as well as from the private industry. I think there is good news and bad news. The good news is, well, there is a clear demand in the job market, and the problem is that we are not supplying it. So this is, in a sense, good news. If it would be the other way around, I think we would be in even much greater trouble. And another thing that came out from the survey, which I found very, very encouraging, was that most people, around 70%, thought that they were well to very well prepared to their work in the private industry. So this is really, really nice. However, there are the problems that John also mentioned. There is clearly a lack of awareness of a hydrogeological career pathway. As Stephanie mentioned, water is just here. People do not realize how important this is and how much work and care has to be taken to maintain this resource in the future. And another issue, which I find as an educator, as a teacher, as well at the university, quite challenging, is that groundwater is becoming increasingly interdisciplinary. As John said, the days of freeze and cherry, where you had a book on Darcy equation and the pump test and definition of porosities, this is no longer good enough. It's not sufficient to tackle the current day's issues, because we have to interact with surface hydrologists. We need all these social skills. There are all these new developing technologies that people also need to master. And with this, I would like to hand over to Shafiq to provide some ideas on how these challenges are actually met in South Africa.
Thanks, Philip. My name is Shafiq Adams. I'm from South Africa. I started my career at a university, and for the last 18 years, I work for an organization that directs and funds research. And then when I go home, I also serve on our Presidential Climate Commission, providing advice to government around just transition, mitigation, and adaptation. So I have a fairly good idea of what they're looking for. And the question, in short, is relevance. If you can't show your relevance, they'll shut you down. And I think this might be part of the problem. So in South Africa, as John indicated, the trend is going down. But in South Africa, we see that more and more of our institutions are offering some sort of groundwater course at some level of intensity. So we actually have a growing groundwater teaching cohort. But what we also have, because we transitioned to universities of technology, and they started to behave like universities, and then we kind of lost the vocational part of the training. And I think that is part, because not all our hydrogeologists want to do the mundane things. We need to get more technicians in the thing. And also, most of our hydrogeological experience sits in the private sector relative to 20, 30 years that was in the public sector. So the demands also shifted. So this is just a background of how we supply water in South Africa. So if you look at the brown and greenish dot, that's usually where groundwater is involved, and this is at settlement level. But at municipal level, at the local level, we only have 2 municipalities out of 100 employing some sort of groundwater expertise. And part of what we are trying to do is to create the demand, to create the pull, rather than us pushing people into the thing. And as South Africa has all the aquifers that you can think of, highly complex, so you need a different type of people or person or hydrogeologist that needs to be trained. But this is the crux of the matter. What do we see and what has been experienced out in the world? Usually we see the symptoms, and then we start chopping at the branches, and we're not dealing with what the root causes are. And I think from our discussions with John, is part of the problem might be the curriculum, and I think he's shown that. But also, where's our comfort zone as hydrogeologists? It's in the technical and engineering dimensions. You tell me about equations and numerical, etc. But how do we start to think about all the other things that some of the other colleagues have mentioned? And of course, there's the issue of the weak signals. What would be the issues in the future that we're starting to just kind of know, but we ignore them because it's not. But also, our transfer links is predominantly, like this organization, like this conference, science to science. But science to society, how prominent is that? Because that buys you your relevance, isn't it? And these are just for the sprint, and you can just read, for some of these root causes, there are simple solutions. And these are some of the issues that we employ in South Africa. And then, of course, part of this is also how do we mix different intra and inter-institutional things to enrich how we teach. For example, we have a national groundwater student field school shared by various universities. It reduces costs and then enable cross-learning. But also part of my job is to drive that awareness. So how do a politician, when he make a speech about water, it's not just surface water, but also groundwater. So thanks, and that's my sprint. So I hand over to Xiaoyi.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm Xiaoyi Jiang from China University of Geosciences. I'm a professor of hydrogeology, and it's my honor to introduce hydrogeology education in China, including undergraduate and graduate education. In the past, we had a major called hydrogeology and engineering geology. Unfortunately, this major was canceled in the year 1998. But many universities still enroll hydrogeology students under the major hydrology and water resources or geological engineering. And in 2007, there was a major was proved groundwater science and engineering. So now in China, we have 3 majors related to groundwater or hydrogeology. And each year, around 1,500 students are enrolled in 17 universities. And the courses in an undergraduate hydrogeology program includes 4 groups. The first is mathematics, chemistry, physics, mechanics. The second is hydrology and geology. And the third, the most important, is many specialty courses. The fourth is field practice and graduation thesis. In most universities, such courses are provided, like introduction to hydrogeology, groundwater hydraulics, groundwater chemistry, groundwater exploitation, numerical simulation, and groundwater resource evaluation, and so on. And in our university at COGB, we provide such courses like groundwater analytical modeling, groundwater monitoring, eco-hydrogeology, and some special issues of groundwater like coastal hydrogeology and geothermal hydrology. And in China, in the first and second years, we have 7 weeks of geology practice, and we have 4 weeks of field practice of hydrogeology, and 12 weeks of graduation thesis to conduct research. So in China, an undergraduate student major in hydrogeology can get employment in hydrogeology. And for the graduate education, we have 3 years for master education. That is 1 year for courses and 2 years for research. So courses are less important than research. And now more than 30 universities have graduate programs of hydrogeology. And in some traditional geoscience universities, we have a program called hydrogeology. But in other universities, the names differ greatly. Some they use the name groundwater hydrology, that is a branch of hydrology, or groundwater engineering, a branch of geological engineering, and groundwater pollution control, a branch of environmental engineering. So the term hydrogeology is not shown in degree certificates of many universities. So now, one challenge in China is the hidden nature of hydrogeology education in many universities make it difficult for employers to find real hydrogeologists. And the second challenge is the different methods or techniques for physical and chemical hydrogeologists make it difficult to decide what courses should be provided to master students. So now let's move to the next speaker to introduce their experience in the UK.
Thank you. My name is John Tellum, and I work at the University of Birmingham in the UK. Thank you, John and gang, for inviting me and my colleague Simeo Sun to say a few words about our experiences with running a 1-year MSc hydrogeology course. Many master's courses, as we've heard from Zhao Wei a moment ago, and as many people will know, of course, are 2 or 3 years long. The standard length for MSc courses in the United Kingdom is 1 year. The MSc course in hydrogeology at the University of Birmingham has been running for 53 years so far. Despite appearances, I haven't been there for that long, quite. But over that time, we've learnt a few things, but certainly don't have all the answers about running a 1-year course, and I'm open, I'm eager to hear from the meeting. One size doesn't fit all, and diversity is all, we feel. Our aim for the course is to educate students on the basics of groundwater science and engineering to a point where they can tackle real-world groundwater problems in whichever context they occur. It's 11 months with very limited time off. The talk component comprises 30 working weeks in a 32 working week period. All modules are compulsory in order to meet the aim. Fieldwork, including on the university campus borehole array, lots of contact with industry. The project is 3.5 months long. The students go from design to delivery. It's supervised weekly. Overall, it's intensive for students and it's intensive for staff. Some general observations. Well, we feel that it requires significant staff-student, and that's group and individual contact time. Student-student interaction is absolutely vital, as we learnt during the COVID period, especially. There is a need to cater for very different backgrounds for students coming to the subject and educational backgrounds from different countries, for example. A background in mathematics is absolutely essential, and we like to we supply support in other areas too. Modules we find are best designed as long and thin so that there is interaction, there's slow development in parallel development, and that they are ordered, they build on each other. There's close collaboration with industry. Over 40 organizations are involved with industry each year. We have to accept, as with any MSc course, any degree course, that we cannot cover everything. What we aim to do is to deliver the tools and the mentality for, in effect, the means for the student to develop. Some of the most important educational needs include adjusting development student thinking in terms of integration, conceptual model building, dealing with very often disparate and sparse data, quantification, but also qualitative tempering, incorporation of qualitative tempering data, accepting, quantifying, and dealing with uncertainty, developing problem-solving approach, often a fundamental change for some of our students, confidence to ask questions, to doubt, to try out alternative conceptualizations, and acceptance of an iterative rather than a linear approach to problem-solving. To this end, assessments are generally combined. They don't just look at the current module, they are building on previous modules. So you have to know about hydraulics to deal with the contaminants. Everything is changing. The subject is changing, as John has indicated. Employers' needs are changing as the world changes, as Paul was talking about. The students' demands are changing. We have to respond to this. One of the things that we are, well, few things that we are attempting to do is MSc level degree apprenticeship, something that we're working closely with industry on across the UK. Various designs of part-time delivery, standalone modules, lifelong learning, distance learning, but that really is technically the most difficult educational area, I feel. And then, of course, awareness, as has been covered previously. Whatever it is, there is a wonderful, important future. I wish I was at the start of my career, not at the end, at this moment in time. I'll pass on now to Francesca.
Thank you. I'm Francesca Lotti, and up to 10 years ago, I was in deep despair. Wrongly dimensioned hydraulic barriers, and as Ty said, finally you know what I mean. So I could not sleep at night, and I realized that I had two options. One was to get depressed, have a nervous breakdown, and complain. The other one was to call my friends from the university, Marco, Vincenzo, Daniela, John, Jeremy, and say, what can we do? Why don't we put together all our lessons, record them, and start a one-year program? So they helped me. I asked for help, and the response was extraordinary. And thank you. So I can get this occasion to thank all of you. And we started with one-year program, basics recorded, and then live lessons. The field, yes, 1 week at the end. What happened after 3 years? After 3 years, you know, I come from nowhere, I'm no one, so in 3 years I reached 76 countries. And in my opinion, this is only, the only meaning of this thing, of this evidence, is this desperate need of this kind of education. And I'm always told, I've searched, but I had not found something like that before, so thank you. But I'm just doing something logical, so I mean, in the consultancy side, I had touched with my hands the lack of knowledge, so let's fill it up. That's it. So in my opinion, it's not difficult, it's simple, let's say, so that's why the name is not so difficult. But I was saying, the field part is tricky, because I'm in the middle of nowhere in central Italy, so somebody is able to reach for the field investigation course. But I use this panel to ask help for the field activities in these countries where I can send my participants and have some experience in the field, since there is no hydrogeology without field experience, in my opinion. And thank you.
Yes, John. Shared online resource model. It's your turn. About the shared online resources model. You will be right there. Yes. Yes. You can just talk about your shared online resources model. Yes.
So I think we can see that there's a deficiency in educational opportunities in not all, but in nearly all countries around the globe, not enough professors, not enough courses, now not enough students even interested in hydrogeology. And this problem, and in many countries, education is being cut back. And so then the question is, well, what can be done to rectify the situation? And in the Groundwater Project, we're hoping then that online materials can start to play a major role. And I think one of the questions then is, how are we going to deal with online versus actually in classroom teaching, and how do we deal with the need for field training, which is so critical to everything? Should I ask my colleagues now? So my perspective is that we're going to need vast amounts of online self-learning materials, and then the universities get to do the critical teaching. And when COVID occurred, all sorts of things went online, but not designed. And when COVID ended, almost all of it was taken offline. So I guess I'll ask my colleagues to comment on this. You know, how do they see the future in terms of online self-learning versus actual, human teaching? I think that the online stuff can cover the dots, and then the professors need to basically connect the dots. I'll ask my colleagues to, where should it all go? Now I just mentioned that China then has more hydrogeology professors now than any country in the world, has more groundwater research, but it's got 1.4 million people. And when I met with the Minister of Ecology and the Environment a few years ago and met with his organization, he's got a research organization of 1,000 people without a single hydrogeologist. And when I asked, wow, there was no awareness then that they were lacking hydrogeologists. Finally, somebody said, well, we tried to hire one and we couldn't find one. So what's interesting is, what would the supply of hydrogeologists in China need to be to actually meet the demand if people realized what the demand would be? I guess I'll also ask my colleagues, this business of the demand, it seems in many cases organizations don't realize they need hydrogeologists. So in fact, the apparent demand isn't what should be the true demand. Do I have colleagues who'd like to comment on any of these things or anything else?
I would comment on the online thing. I personally think that online is not the solution, at least not for the basics and not for the undergrad. Like you need, I think, especially in an undergrad stage, you need to have someone who explains you things, because you cannot make the link by yourself most of the time. And I think there it's very, very important that the professors also make the link with the other disciplines, because hydrogeology intersects with basically all hard science, with social science, with IT, with more or less all the fields of science. And I think, at least on an undergrad stage, you cannot replace teaching with online teaching. And then at the graduate stage, I think you still need some in-presence parts, at least. Maybe you can complement the in-presence parts with some specific, locally specific fields where you can find the resource online. But that must be top up to a solid, basic curriculum.
If I could just comment, John, please comment.
Sorry. Can I just support what Stephanie has said and add that I think one important area that we certainly have come across is the need for interaction between students as well as with the staff. That makes a huge amount of difference to certain students in bringing home the messages, looking at problems from different directions and so on. So student-student interaction. So if they're remote, that's much more difficult.
Yes. So my observation was that online teaching has some advantages, and having John's books online is, of course, a great thing. Also, when you are preparing courses, countless times I got inspiration from these books. Yes. However, when I'm teaching the basic hydrogeological curriculum, I never get the feeling that people really know what it means. And when we then go out to the field camp, I see really the coins drop. It's the first time they will measure a depth to groundwater, they can understand what it is, and it is exactly at this moment where they can really put this theoretical academic knowledge into practice. I can show as many diagrams in course of piezometers, of boreholes, calculating pressures. They can even all pass the exams, but then when they come to the field, this is essentially useless. They need this transition from academic knowledge to the field. And this is not something we can do with online teaching. Perhaps to a certain extent with some instruction videos, but it's much better if you really stand in the piezometer, think about where the batteries are, etc.
So I disagree with all of this entirely. 30 or 40 years ago, when I was standing up to the blackboard, once again teaching Darcy's Law, I wondered, why am I doing this? Why are there 1,000 professors in the world standing up and writing Darcy's Law? Surely that can be learned online with whatever the visual aids and the self-testing and whatnot, because things like that can be illustrated with graphics and all sorts of tools. But I think, although I can agree with you in principle, back in the old days when there were few students and enough professors, but it seems to me much of what hydrogeologists are going to need to know, they're going to have to learn online. Otherwise, there's this woeful undersupply.
Francesca, yes.
I have statistics.
What's that?
Yes, I have statistics because the first edition was recorded, didn't work. So now there is the dimension of team working, which is the core of working together and exchanging ideas. Maybe the basic, maybe it's not, we can just have one way. We can mix together different ways. Recorded, partially recorded, then working together, live online lesson, but then presence in the field.
I'm not advocating not having professors, but there's so much to learn. Oh, and by the way, Philip mentioned that in the survey, the majority of people think in hydrogeology think they're well enough educated. I'm shocked. Like we're all on the verge of incompetence most of the time. Hydrogeology is so complicated now. When I go to projects and whatnot and so forth, and even with a team in many cases, the problem is complex. And so I think the fact that people actually think they know enough is a product of this self-esteem generation. I've got 3 grandkids in university, and they actually think they know something. So one of the problems is to get to the point where we realize that we don't know, because hydrogeology is so vast and so complicated, and that's why you need a team. Anyway.
Can I step in here and move us to the questions?
Yes.
And just, I'd like to throw in that my statement of yes and, I'd like to bring that back here. I think there is room for all of this. All of this has to improve. There are some students who will never be able to come to class in person, so we have to find a way to deliver things to them the best we can, and other students who will benefit from being in person. So I'd like to move us on to some questions that have come from the audience, and John, I'll ask you to pass these out through the panel. The first is, how can we improve education in hydrogeology in developing regions, and in particular, how can we get the talented students who are trained with scholarships and academic mobility to return to their countries to contribute there?
I'll ask Shafiq to comment on that if he would.
Yeah, it's certainly, and it's not just, I don't think it's just a developing world problem. I think it's just a general problem. And I guess South Africa is a good example. I mean, all the Australians in the rooms taking all my students that we've paid a lot of money to train. But similarly, if you look at how we attract academics, and most of our these new institutions is coming from the rest of the continent. So, but there needs to be some mechanism where we can equalize these things. So whether you have a these type of mega centers that collaborate. So you still wherever you are, but of course it's all about opportunities, and a lot of hydrogeology is field-based. So if you're in this institution, as an example, that does not allow you to do field work, which we have in South Africa, why do you want to stay? Just teach and show PowerPoint presentations the whole day, which again, I think that there needs to be, and more, it brings me back to this discussion. I think we're having a binary discussion for and against online and not online, but you can have both. And I think, and that is a great equalizer. Wherever you are, you can do. We have doctors operating from one country in another country. Why are we, as hydrogeologists, afraid to do these type of things? But the main problem is that countries need to see the value of hydrogeology first to invest in that. If they don't see it, and again, there's then no investments going in to retain those type of skills within the country.
Paul, do you have a comment?
Yeah. Yeah, I have a few comments. Yeah, one, and this might be a little, maybe even sound a little politically incorrect, but something I find in the developing world, I agree with John, I disagree with Shafiq. I agree with John in that, for instance, when we do development work in Africa, people who have been trained in hydrogeology in North America, they have no useful skills. Well, in the developing world, what I find is that, for instance, in the Northern Uganda program I spoke about, we're working with a lot of ex-child soldiers, human sex slaves, human beasts of burden. They're keen to learn, and yeah, they're not going to become professors, but they can learn how to drill wells, do exploration, repair wells, do cutting logs, all that. The big difference I find between Western hydrogeologists trained in the West and hydrogeologists trained in development countries is in the West, they are keen. You will get a PhD out there who'll get their hands dirty, who'll help do manual drilling, who'll really do field work. In much of the developing world, and of course every country is different, but it's very hierarchical. And so, for instance, in Northern Uganda, students from Gulu University, masters, PhDs, they won't come out to the field. They're too good. They're academics. They won't get their hands dirty. I find, and I don't know if this is a remnant of colonialism or just the hierarchical nature of education, but I find this to be a big barrier getting the academic people, the students of the real students of hydrogeology actually out doing field work and doing the hands-on work that's needed.
That's a really important point. In my experience then, culturally, if you go out in the field and get your hands dirty, that's the sign of lack of success. In hydrogeology, of course, that's a killer.
So I'm just going to step in again. I hate to do this, but I want to leave a little bit of time for a summary. I'm going to give a little pre-summary from my perspective here. Some of the key things that hit me. First is, a time of challenge is a time of opportunity. And we are facing a real challenge here, and I think we have an opportunity to define hydrogeology going into the future. Some things that stood out, 60% of practicing hydrogeologists already are not specifically trained, and that number is going to go way up. One course in hydrogeology, people feeling like that is enough training if they're coming out of many programs. Stakeholder engagement is important. Soft skills are important. Inspiration, social justice, communication skills. So how do we include all of this along with everything that we've had in our traditional base and not have 5-year masters that nobody's going to take? So again, what I'll suggest is if you're interested in that and if you want to contribute to the conversation, please feel free to come here, join in, and then we'll reach out to you and say, how do we define those key skills, soft skills, hard skills, as we move forward? And with that, I'll turn it back to John for a summary. Yeah.
And we still have some time for questions. We have
Good.
10 minutes more, Ty.
Oh, it's going, I thought we were at
No,
okay.
we still
Good.
have time.
Never mind.
There's still a few questions.
Consider
from
that
the
not a
audience.
summary. So here's one. How can we incentivize universities to value applied master's work in addition to PhD education?
To get university administration to accept anything that's sensible in terms of the geosciences, and particularly hydrogeology, is almost impossible. Universities have so many VPs now, and it's interesting, the more VPs the university has, then the less geoscience and the less hydrogeology is going to be. So it's interesting how hydrogeology somehow gets lost in university. But I think we need some rules for the sake of hydrogeology. One rule should be that civil engineers in their education shouldn't be allowed to take one groundwater course, because that makes them dangerous. If they're going to take a course at all in groundwater, it needs to be several. And one of our problems then, we have so many people from so many disciplines that have taken one hydrogeology course, and it gives the impression then that in fact you can function in hydrogeology. And I'm sure the many hydrogeologists in the world are frustrated with how the lack of recognition in hydrogeology. But anyway, I'll ask the panel to comment on any of this stuff.
What was your master?
My master?
Your degree. Were you a hydrogeologist?
So I did a bachelor's degree in geological engineering, which is a mixture of geology and engineering. It was great fun. I found that geologists basically had a lot of questions and no answers. The engineers had basically a few questions with a few equations and all the answers. So it was like a schizophrenic education. And then I went to Berkeley and I got a master's degree in geological engineering, but I couldn't find a supervisor to do hydrogeology. And then I left and I went to the University of Illinois and the same thing happened. And so in fact, I didn't get any degree in hydrogeology. In fact, I hadn't published a paper in hydrogeology until I became a professor. So then I saw an ad for a hydrogeology professor at University of Manitoba, and I applied. And it was amazing that that department was looking for a hydrogeologist. They didn't know what it was. And so I applied, and I told them I was a hydrogeologist. I've never taught a course in it. I've never published a paper in it. I didn't have a degree in it. And of course, that was the good old days that I referred to when hydrogeology was a total frontier. And then the problem now, it's just this vast, as I mentioned in my introduction, it's this vast morass of topics, like all the way from PFAS to nitrate. And one of the things about education, we're all educated in porous media hydrogeology. So the Friesen-Cherry book has 2 pages in fractured rock, and all the other books have 2 or 3 pages in fractured rock. In many parts of the world, your whole practice is fractured rock, in volcanic rock, whatever. So in a way, we're kind of all undereducated or miseducated. The world's changing rapidly around us, and now we've got students not wanting to go into the field, and we're trying to do some catch up. And I have 3 grandkids, and they're all going into science, and I'm telling them about hydrogeology, and they look at me blankly. And their mother's a hydrogeologist, and they just can't imagine it being interesting because they've never heard of it. Water isn't even mentioned in many cases in Canada because we've got too much water and all that stuff. But anyway, so I'm a product of a non-educational system. And now we're trying to switch to a totally educational system so that graduates actually know the right things. Because that's what Ty is talking about. What are the right things? I attended a whole session yesterday on climate change, and everybody was talking about water levels, graphs of water levels. Like, water level? What is a water level? Are you talking about the water table? Are you talking about potentiometric surface? And nobody distinguished between them. So it wasn't an intelligent conversation. I mean, how can you have a conversation on water levels if you're not specifying your conceptual model as to whether it's the water table or a potentiometric surface? And one of the problems then is when you go looking for groundwater data, what do you find? You find water level data. Like, what's that? Anyway, any comments on my ranting? Yeah, go ahead.
I think that my job. Sorry, go ahead.
I will just very briefly follow up. So, what you said, okay, I agree with many of the points, but I do not think that the solution is to essentially encapsulate hydrogeology and make sure it is not in touch with the other disciplines, because it's in the nature of the resource to be in contact with other disciplines: agriculture, climate change, economics, social justice, all these things. As hydrogeologists, we cannot just focus and say, okay, we will be now the ones who do only this. We need to somehow be broad. And it's a difficult trade-off. It's between how far do we go and lose the basic competencies to how much do we know about nothing, in a sense.
All right, this is very dangerous stuff we're talking about here. We're talking about dilution. So we want hydrogeologists to be competent in hydrogeology. But then people want, well, they got to know this, they got to know that, they got to know sociology, they got to know human relations, and all that needs to be added, plus economics. So if you start adding all these things, then how does a hydrogeologist going to be competent. Like, so the crisis is even bigger when we start catering to the dilution.
Yeah, and I'll just echo exactly what John said. And I think there's this element of we do need to know many of these things. So the question is, how much do we need to know each, all of us? And then where do we specialize? Where do we go from there? So I think that part of my job is to make the panel uncomfortable. So I look for the most uncomfortable making question that I can find. And I'm going to make it even more uncomfortable with the way I say it. And that is, this panel is dripping with privilege. That young people today can't afford to take time out. They can't afford all of this training that we're telling them that they need to go into this profession that doesn't necessarily pay them that much. How do we address this in a way that we're really preparing people in the reality of the world that the students are facing? Maybe I made you too uncomfortable.
Well, about the payment, I think the consultants should say something.
Yeah, sure. No, it's real that sometimes we see people that have spent years in concentrating on something that is not spending immediately in the industries. But on the other side, when we see people that have too much skilled on practical items, they are missing the wider picture of to be an hydrogeologist or geologist or engineer. So it's a mix. We need to surely try to concentrate more on the real needs, also in terms of cost of the education and time that is needed. Better less years, but really concentrated and able to be spent in the industry before respect to something more with dilution.
Paul.
Yeah, I guess I disagree. I come from a couple unique perspectives. One, I went from the oil and gas industry to groundwater, and I don't think for young people it's necessarily a driver. Also, something I address uniquely, I think I can address one of Stephanie's comments. By 1981, I had worked in 2 of the 3 underwater marine labs in the world, and hydrogeology is way more exciting than being a marine geologist or a marine biologist. Absolutely, and I know that more now than ever. And to transfer that excitement and curiosity and interest and opportunity, I think that's what young people need, and they'll find a way. Sure, there's challenges to go to university, but there are challenges. I think we all face challenges going to university at our various stages. And so I don't see. Oh, and then the other point is, yes, maybe universities cost more, but again, I would agree with John that the ability, young people today, they're so autodidactic. There's so much available online at no cost. These are big obstacles more for going to university and the long-term commitment to do a master's, PhD, postdoc. But in terms of getting into industry, what industry is really looking for, sure, you have to have a minimum of degrees and some qualifications and a resume, but what we really want is what people know, what they actually can know, and what they can do. And again, people being autodidactic, the things available online. And as much as I think hydrogeology is very much filled as an education, geophysics is even worse. You look at Western Canada, and all the curriculums are focused on deep seismic reflection, and nothing to do with any of the techniques that we actually need to use in terms of water exploration, contaminant mapping, geophysics applied to shallow hydrogeological engineering problems. So yeah, I think young people have it pretty good today. There's a lot of opportunity.
If I could make a broader comment. So I used to kind of look down on the idea of a one-year master's. You know, like what could you learn in a year? And now it's obvious that to supply the need and to attract young people to the field, we're going to have many more one-year masters around the world. And then I talked to some graduates of the Birmingham program, and I realized from their perspective, which is the perspective that matters, because they did the one-year master, went out and works, it was very effective. So now that universities are more or less broke in North America, there's a big push for universities to want to offer one-year masters basically to make money. I mean, universities aren't in education, they're interested in financial survival. So Ty has a one-year master's coming along. The University of Waterloo is going to design one. And we're going to have many of them. And then the question, in a 1 year, what should they learn? And you figured that out in your world for your market, and then these other programs are going to have to figure it out. And then Francesca, then you're going to get these people who've learned a few things, but they need connecting the dots on all of the other stuff that we're not going to get.
Can I just add that maybe the main, in my opinion, hydrogeology is a lifetime learning. So the only thing that we should try to transmit is passion. And then one way or another, we have all the possibilities to learn online or with books, whatever. So, yeah.
John.
I'll just say a couple of things. Obviously, I agree with what John has just said, but, well, and Francesca, but awareness is at the bottom of this. If government, if other types of industry are aware, then there's potential for funding, and via things like apprenticeship schemes, so working very closely with industry, that people are actually employed in industry and they are getting some of these issues that, for example, Paul was talking about in a slightly different context, but looking at the other skills that are much better taught by industry than by universities, but a collaboration. And in that case, the student is getting paid and getting the education.
So just to put a pin on that and then turn it to the conclusion, I think that one thing that I would disagree with John about the one-year master's is if you look at what Francesca has done and what John has done and what the 10 faculty in my department have done, it is about student-centered learning. And my fear is that we're going to start to see more and more one-year master programs that are just to make money. And this, we don't have that yet, but they're coming. So I think we need to be on the guard for that. So I'll turn it back to John.
We need to close now.
If I can make one more comment, but there's some countries in the world that don't need a one-year master's program. Switzerland, for example, and South Africa.
Yeah, thank you.
It's amazing, South Africa's educational system when it comes to groundwater. So the groundwater crisis is so different from country to country. And I guess that's what we're kind of seeing here. There's a groundwater crisis in most countries in the world. There's a water crisis in the world, etc. And then we've got very erratic and spotty education. And we as a hydrogeological community, we're trying to figure out what should be our common denominator. So like what should a hydrogeologist kind of know as a bare minimum common denominator so we can even talk to one another? So I guess we're done. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your attention. This has been, I think, a very interesting contrast in ideas. And of course, that was the purpose of assembling this very interesting and diverse panel. So thanks for showing up.
Thank you. Well done, John.
Thanks very much. That was really great. That was excellent.